Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nico Aka Apriansa. On this occasion, I will discuss just a little explanation about discourse community and speech community, where I try to get to know the difference between the two. And then after that, we will discuss the discourse and language, social identity, gender, and ideology. I'll try to explain each concept with the relevant examples and examine the relationship between the concepts. First, discourse community. A discourse community is a group of people who have a common goal and use certain ways of communication to achieve that goal. They have specific rules, language styles, and terms that only members of the group understand. Members of a discourse community usually have similar background or interests. For example, in academic community, for example, students and lecturers in a medical department, they use medical terms such as diagnosis, prognosis, or anemia that may not be understood by outsiders. The goal is to learn and develop medical science.
What is a discourse community? Collection of people or groups that work towards a common goal through communication. This group develops a process for communication, a unique vocabulary of jargon, and a power structure tied to the source of their community.
Take our lead.
Linguist John Swales defined discourse communities as groups that have goals or purposes, and use communication to achieve these goals. Some examples of a discourse community might be those who read and or contribute to a particular academic journal, or members of an email list for Madonna fans.
The characteristics of discourse community: first, it has a common goal, and then use special language or terms, we can say jargon, and has agreed as a communication rules. Its members interact with each other regularly.
He outlined 6 characteristics of discourse communities. 1. Common public goals. 2. Methods of communicating among members. 3. Participatory communication methods. 4. Genres that define the group. 5. A lexis. And 6. A standard of knowledge needed for membership. Swales, 471 to 473.
First, having a common purpose. Every discourse community is formed because its members have a common goal or interest. This goal becomes the main reason they communicate and interact. For example, a community of writers, their goal is to produce written works such as novels, poems, or articles. They gather to give each other feedback and improve their writing skills. And using specialized language or terms means jargon. Members of the discourse community use special terms that only they understand. These terms are often not understood by outsiders. For example, programmer community, they use terms like algorithm, and then coding, and so on. People who are not in the IT may not understand these terms. And for medical community, for example, doctors and nurses use terms like diagnosis, prognosis, anemia. These terms are very specific and only understood by those who work in healthcare. The next characteristic is having agreed communication rules. Every discourse community has communication norms or rules that its member must follow. These rules can be in the form of procedures for expressing opinions, writing formats, or discussion etiquette. For example, in academic community, when writing a research journal, there is a standard format such as abstract, introduction, methodology, and bibliography or reference. Every member must follow this format. And in online forum community, for example, in Facebook, Instagram, There are rules such as no abusive language or copyright in their content. Violating members can be warned or sometimes be banned. And then we go to speech community.
Whether you know it or not, you belong to a speech community. And there's a good chance that you belong to several different speech communities too. Unlike a community where people live that uses geographical markers to define its borders, a speech community uses linguistic markers to outline its borders. Even if you are a monolingual speaker of English or another language, by virtue of being a university student, you are now a part of a speech community, which is separate from other speech communities that you might be a part of, either because you're Canadian, or you play a particular sport, or you belong to an age demographic. All of these are speech communities, which have their linguistic markers, and some of these linguistic markers overlap, which means
Speech community are groups of people who use the same language or dialect in everyday life. They don't necessarily have a common goal like a discourse community, but they share a way of speaking and understanding each other due to a common geographical, cultural, or social background. For example, Javanese society, people who live in Central Java or East Java use Japanese language with speech levels such as Jawa Kromo, Jawa Inggil, and so on. And they understand this rule because they were raised in Javanese culture. And Betawi people, for example, Betawi people in Jakarta use Betawi dialects such as ente, gue, lo. They understand this language because they grew up in Betawi environment. The characteristic of speech community. First, the uses of the same language or dialect, and then does not necessarily have a common goal, formed due to geographical, cultural, or social factors. Communication occurs naturally in everyday. Using the same language or dialect, members of speech community use the same language, dialect, or language variety in their daily lives. This language becomes their identity and main communication tool. For example, Japanese community using Japanese language with speech levels such as Kromo Inggil and the other terms. And Batak community, for example, use Batak language with terms such as horas for greeting and so on. The second, the characteristic of speech community, it doesn't always have a common goal. Unlike discourse communities, speech communities are not always formed for a common purpose. They use the same language because of geographical, cultural, social factors, not because they want to achieve a certain target. For example, people in a remote village, they use the same local language because they live in the same area, not because they have a specific goal. And urban communities, people in Jakarta, use colloquial Indonesian or Betawi dialect because they live in the same neighborhood. The third, formed due to geographical, cultural, or social factors. Speech communities form naturally because the members live in the same area, have the same cultural background, or come from the same social group. And for example, cultural factors. Minangkabau people speak Bahasa Minang because they share the same cultural heritage. For social factors, young people in urban area use slang such as the language that they can understand. And then the fourth characteristic, the communication happens naturally in daily life. Speech community members communicate naturally and spontaneously in their daily activities. The language they use is part of their habits and culture. For example, in traditional market, sellers and buyers in traditional markets communicate using local language or dialects. For example, in Palembang, they use Bahasa Palembang. And in family situation, for example, in Musi Banyuasin, in Musi Banyuasin context, parents and children, it must be speak in Bahasa Musi. because without thinking everything. And traditional events, for example, a traditional ceremony such as wedding or a party, people use the local language as a part of traditions. And for the real life examples of combination between discourse community and speech community, for example, imagine a Japanese doctor working in a hospital as a part of the discourse community. He used medical terms such as hypertension, stethoscope, and then diagnosis, and so on. When communicating with his colleagues, they use it. But sometimes, however, when he goes home to his hometown in Central Java, for example, he uses Japanese with his family and neighbors who part of the speech community of him. And then we pay attention about the difference between discourse community and then speech community. The point is, if discourse community, it only focus on shared goal and the use of specialist language to achieve those goals. For example, is a community of doctors, gamers, farmers, and then lecturers. While speech community focus on the use of common language or dialect due to geographical or cultural background. For example, Japanese, Betawi, Sundanese communities.
Have you ever stopped to think about how different your world can be if you stop speaking your first language? Indeed, it would be very weird. All the things you can think of can no longer be expressed through you, as the language you have once spoken is now gone. The person in this video is communicating with his friends through his language, which allows for his friends to react and respond to him. Ludwig Wittgenstein once said, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And by that, he means that language is key in communication with the world. So having a narrow or limited language basically is limiting yourself to understanding of your world and the understanding of the world about you. To simplify this concept, take for example cultures. Cultures can be represented in many ways, such as celebrations, public gathering, media, clothing, religious activity, and mostly language. See, if a definitive language was not present in a culture, it wouldn't be possible to distinguish them from other cultures. This goes same for an individual, because a person's background can be determined by listening for any accents they have.
Many of the touristy spots as we can.
You guys get all panicky and shit. I'm Indian and I approve this. So relax, it's cool, because that's how it works, right?
That might have been a little offensive, but that's not the point I'm trying to get across. The point I'm trying to get across is language affects identity. See, language is a big part of our identity, and it is essential to every aspect and interaction with the world around us. As a child, we begin by learning one language, our mother language, which sets up a way for our parents to communicate with us throughout our life. See, these guys through language can identify who they are, and they go to school, and in school they can talk to other people, and through those people they can communicate and learn more things about the world around them, thus giving them personality, what to do, what to not do, and that basically builds up a person's own identity. Now, as we grow older, we experience many things and communicate with various people. With the help of language, we interact with different people and develop emotions, likes, dislikes, wants, etc. Once we grow old enough, we share our wisdom, knowledge, guidelines with our future generation. To conclude, language is part of our everyday life. It helps shape a person by allowing them to communicate with the world, giving them the ability to learn new things, share experiences, educate other people, and many more. Without language, it would be impossible to communicate with someone. For example, in this clip, you cannot directly talk to someone who is in outer space. However, her father, who is inside a black hole, is communicating with her through a watch that she has in her hand, and he is giving her information about the physics inside a black hole, which allows her to create a machine that takes all the humans off Earth, thus saving them. So as you can see, even when there's a black hole between her and her father, she's still able to communicate with him and identifying his knowledge about the physics inside a black hole, which allows her to create this equation that saves humanity. Woohoo!
Discourse and language. Discourse refers to the way we use language to communicate in a particular context. Language is not just words, but also reflect meanings, values, and power in society. For example, formal and informal language. When talking to our lecturer, we use formal language like "Good morning, sir," compared to informal language like "Morning, sir," when talking to our friend. And also media language. News on television use objective and formal language, whereas content on social media often use casual and emotive language. Social class. Social class are groups in society that are differentiated by economic status, education, or occupation. The language used often reflects a person's social class. For example, elite language versus folk language. People from the upper class may use formal English or Indonesian in conversation, while people from the middle or lower class more often use local language or slang language. And then access to education. Children from wealthy families may be more fluent in English or in Bahasa Indonesia due to attending international school, for example, while children from underprivileged families may be more familiar with local language. For example, in Palembang, they use Bahasa Palembang. In Muba, they use Bahasa Sekayu. And gender. Gender refers to the social and cultural roles associated with the sexes. Language often reflects and reinforces gender stereotypes. For example, what I mean that gender stereotypes, words when the word of man or male or female, it's so different. While with woman, the word of the strong, assertive, are associated with men, and then as while gentle and then soft, it must be a male. Identity. Identity is the way a person perceives himself and how others perceive him. Language is an important tool for expressing identity, be it like a cultural, religious, or personal. For example, cultural identity. Batak people use surnames in their names such as Sitorus or Sinaga, which reflects their cultural identity. And then religious identity, for example, Muslims sometimes always use terms like Assalamualaikum as a greeting, which reflects their religious identity. And ideology. Ideology are system of beliefs or values that influence the way we think and act. Language is often used to spread or reinforce particular ideology. For example, in politics parties use slogans like clean, caring, and professional to spread their ideology. And then language from advertising. Beauty product adverts often use language such as white is beautiful, which reinforces the ideology that white skin is more desirable. And then the relationship between those concepts. Language is a tool to express identity, to reinforce ideology and reflect social class and gender. Discourse is the way we use language in particular context, which is influenced by all the above factors. Language is not only a communication tool, but also reflects a social class, gender, identity, and ideology. By understanding this relationship, we can be more aware of how language shapes and is influenced by society. Okay, I think that's all about my explanations. Thank you very much for your attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.